My family laughed when I announced I was bringing a +1 to our reunion. My aunt smirked and announced to the room that imaginary boyfriends do not count. But when the black bulletproof SUVs rolled up the driveway and security stepped out first, followed by the man they had been mocking, the silence was deafening. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Olivia, I am 33 years old, and I finally learned how to play their twisted game. Imaginary boyfriends do not count, Olivia. My Aunt Beatrice's voice pierced the noise of the living room loud enough to ensure every relative heard her. The sprawling $4 million lakeside estate felt like a gladiator arena where I was the main entertainment. Laughter erupted around the room. It was not gentle teasing. It was the kind of harsh, condescending cackle that makes your stomach drop. My mother Patricia stood by the massive stone fireplace swirling her expensive Chardonnay. She did not defend me. Instead, she let out a theatrical sigh, shaking her styled hair, as if my existence was an exhausting burden she heroically bore. My father Richard chuckled from his leather armchair, completely unfazed by the public humiliation of his oldest daughter. I stood near the entryway, gripping the strap of my simple canvas tote bag, letting the waves of their amusement crash over me. I had just walked through the heavy wooden door after a grueling flight, exhausted, but hopeful that this family reunion might be different. I had told them weeks ago that I was bringing someone special. I even emailed my mother to update the catering headcount so there would be food. But to them, I was just the punchline to a long joke that never got old. For my entire life, I have been the designated scapegoat of this family. While my younger sister Madison paraded around in designer labels and acted like royalty, I was the one who faded into the background. It was a conscious choice. Today, I wore a basic gray sweater, dark denim jeans, and zero makeup. My hair was pulled back into a messy bun. I looked ordinary, plain, and entirely unnoteworthy. This carefully crafted blandness was my armor against a family obsessed with keeping up appearances and flaunting their wealth at the local country club. To them, my lack of flashy logos and expensive jewelry was proof of my failure. They believed I was just a glorified computer repair tech, someone who fixed broken laptops for minimum wage and lived a lonely life in a cramped apartment. They had no idea that my plain clothes were by design, or that my boring computer job was actually a brilliant cover for my real career. I am a digital forensics expert. I run a highly lucrative cybersecurity firm that consults directly with federal agencies and multinational corporations to track down white-collar criminals. My daily life involves dismantling complex financial frauds and hunting down people who steal millions of dollars. But my family did not know any of that. They never asked a single question about my life. They never cared enough to look past the surface. To Patricia and Richard, success was only measured by what you could wear on your wrist or park in your driveway. Because I did not flaunt my wealth, they assumed I had none. Because I did not brag about relationships, they assumed no man would ever want to be seen with me. Standing there in that opulent living room, listening to my aunts and uncles snicker at my expense, I realized exactly how deeply entrenched their delusions really were. They needed me to be the massive failure so they could feel better about their own empty status-obsessed lives. I took a slow, deep breath, refusing to give them the dramatic emotional reaction they desperately wanted. I did not cry. I did not scream or turn around and run out the door. I simply stood my ground, my face a mask of polite indifference. The laughter had barely subsided when my brother-in-law Jamal swaggered into the room. Jamal is a 32-year-old African-American investment banker who married my sister Madison 2 years ago, and he fit into my toxic family perfectly. He held a crystal tumbler of expensive bourbon in one hand and deliberately adjusted his tailored shirt cuff, making absolutely sure everyone got a clear view of his brand-new Rolex watch. The thick gold caught the light from the overhead chandelier, blindingly ostentatious. He walked directly over to where I was standing by the door, a smug, superior grin plastered across his face. "Well, if it is not our favorite computer geek," Jamal said, his voice dripping with heavy arrogance. "Tell me, Olivia, how is the thrilling world of fixing Wi-Fi routers going for you? Are you still scraping by on those basic hourly wages?" I offered him a flat, unamused smile, keeping my posture completely relaxed. Work is very steady, I replied, simply giving him absolutely nothing. He let out a mocking laugh that drew the attention of the entire room back to us. That is really cute, he said, taking a slow sip of his bourbon. I just closed a deal that would cover your rent for the next decade. The high-stakes banking world is exhausting, but somebody has to keep this family in the luxurious lifestyle we are all accustomed to. It must be really nice living your simple low-income lifestyle. No stress, no financial responsibilities. Just plugging in internet cables and going home. You really should let me give you some investment advice. His condescension was suffocating. Madison giggled from across the room, admiring her husband. They looked at me with intense disdain, unaware of the storm about to hit their fragile world. My mother. Patricia stepped forward, her posture rigid with elegance. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her silk blouse and sighed loudly enough to ensure the entire room fell silent. Jamal is just being honest, Olivia, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. We only want what is best for you. Look at your sister. She gestured toward Madison. At 30 years old, Madison was the undeniable golden child of the family. She was perched on a velvet accent chair, draped head to toe in obvious luxury. Her dress screamed high-end designer, her wrists clinked with stacked diamond bracelets, and a ridiculously oversized leather handbag rested at her feet. Madison had always been Patricia's ultimate trophy, the daughter who understood the vital importance of country club status and relentless networking. Madison understands ambition. Patricia continued, shaking her head as she looked me up and down. She and Jamal are building an empire. They are purchasing investment properties, attending charity galas, and securing our family legacy. And then we look at you. My father Richard stepped up beside his wife, crossing his arms over his cashmere sweater. His disapproval was a physical weight in the room. Your mother is right, Richard added, his tone sharp and dismissive. It is frankly embarrassing to answer questions about you at the club. My colleagues ask what my oldest daughter is doing these days, and I have to mumble something about computer repairs. Do you have any idea how that reflects on me? We paid for a premium education, Olivia. We gave you every advantage. You could have gone into corporate law or joined a respectable hedge fund. Instead, you chose a dead-end path that provides absolutely zero prestige. It is a complete waste of potential. Aunt Beatrice nodded vigorously from her corner, chiming in like a loyal backup singer. And showing up to a major family event looking like you just rolled out of bed, she added, gesturing vaguely at my gray sweater. We have prominent guests arriving tomorrow for the main barbecue. Please tell me you brought something appropriate to wear, rather than those awful denim jeans. You are 33 years old, for heaven's sake. It is time to stop playing the rebellious teenager and grow up. The coordinated attack was suffocating, a familiar routine they had perfected over decades. They operated like a pack of wolves circling their target, waiting for me to break down, apologize, or storm out in tears. I refused to give them the satisfaction of a breakdown. I had spent years mastering the gray rock method, an emotional survival tactic where I became as uninteresting and unresponsive as a literal stone. I kept my face entirely blank, letting their insults bounce off my impenetrable exterior. My jeans are incredibly comfortable, I replied, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any defensive edge. And my career pays my bills without any issue. I am perfectly content. Patricia let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Contentment is just an excuse for laziness, Olivia. People who are content do not achieve greatness. They just exist. I looked directly into her eyes, my gaze cold and calculating. Greatness is highly subjective, Mother. Some people measure it by the weight of their jewelry, and others measure it by the peace in their lives. I prefer peace. Jamal scoffed loudly, taking another sip of his expensive bourbon. Peace does not pay a mortgage on a $4 million lake house, Olivia. Real money does. I offered Jamal a razor-thin smile, noting the faint bead of sweat forming near his hairline, despite the cool air conditioning. You are absolutely right, Jamal. Real money pays the bills. It is always fascinating to see how people manage their finances behind closed doors. I did not elaborate, leaving the statement hanging in the air just long enough to see a brief flash of unease cross his face. Before anyone could analyze my comment, I pulled my phone from my pocket. I kept my movements slow and deliberate, completely ignoring the burning glares of my parents. I opened my messages and navigated to my chat with Harrison. "They are putting on quite the show today," I typed quickly. "Estimated time of arrival." His response came through almost instantly. "3 minutes. Get ready." I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my expression remaining completely passive. "Are you texting your imaginary boyfriend?" Aunt Beatrice sneered, stepping closer. "Is he stuck in traffic in his imaginary car?" "He had a business meeting," I answered flatly. "He will be here shortly." My father rolled his eyes, turning his back on me in a gesture of utter dismissal. "Do not humor her, Beatrice. If she actually had a partner, he would have been here by now. No respectable man would tolerate this kind of disrespect to her family by showing up hours late to our reunion." Madison stood from her velvet chair, smoothing her expensive dress with a flourish. She walked to the center of the room, picking up a crystal flute of champagne from the nearby serving tray. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the glass, demanding the room's attention. "Well, since Olivia refuses to live in reality, I think we should focus on the people who actually matter," Madison announced, her voice echoing loudly. "Let us make a toast." She raised her glass high, looking down her nose at me with a malicious gleam in her eyes. "To Olivia," Madison said, her tone dripping with venomous pity. "May she eventually find a way out of her sad, lonely life. And may she one day understand what it takes to be a real success in this world, instead of just a massive disappointment." The family raised their glasses, murmuring their agreement. Patricia smiled proudly at Madison, while Jamal let out a chuckle of victory. I stood completely still, watching them revel in their cruelty. Then a heavy rhythmic sound echoed from outside the massive front windows. It was the loud sound of tires crushing the gravel on the long, private driveway. The rumble of powerful engines cut through the arrogant silence of the living room. The champagne glasses hovered frozen in mid-air as every head turned toward the massive bay windows. Patricia frowned, her perfect facade cracking slightly as she marched over to part the heavy drapes. The family trailed behind her, drawn forward by a primal curiosity. What they saw outside wiped the smug expressions off their faces. Two pristine black Cadillac Escalades glided up the circular driveway. They moved with a heavy armored grace that commanded absolute submission. These were not the standard luxury leases Jamal bragged about. These were custom bulletproof vehicles equipped with reinforced chassis and tinted privacy glass, so dark it swallowed the sunlight. The sheer physical presence of the SUVs made my parents' million-dollar estate look like a cottage. The Escalades came to a synchronized halt right in front of the main portico. The family stood paralyzed behind the glass, their breaths catching in their throats. Before any of the vehicle doors fully opened, 3 men stepped out from the lead and trailing positions. They moved with the crisp, calculated efficiency of highly trained private security contractors. Dressed in immaculate dark suits with discreet communication earpieces, they immediately fanned out to secure the perimeter. 1 man stood near the rear bumper, scanning the tree line, while another moved to the front steps, establishing a secure pathway. The third guard, a towering figure with a hard expression, walked directly to the rear passenger door of the second Escalade. He stood at attention, waiting for a silent signal from the inside. The contrast was staggering. My family loved to play at being wealthy. They loved their club memberships, leased luxury sedans, and flashy designer labels. They constantly demanded attention, desperate to be perceived as the elite. But the scene unfolding on our driveway was a masterclass in true, untouchable corporate power. It was the kind of wealth that did not need to scream for attention because it already owned the entire room. It was the kind of power that required an active security detail just to attend a weekend family reunion. Patricia gripped the windowsill, her knuckles turning white. Jamal lowered his bourbon glass, his jaw hanging slack. Madison stared at the armored vehicles, forgetting her malicious toast. They were entirely captivated, unable to comprehend the level of influence parked on their property. The towering security guard reached out, gripping the heavy metal handle of the passenger door. He pulled it open with a smooth, practiced motion, stepping back to allow him to exit. Harrison stepped out into the afternoon light, commanding the space instantly. At 36 years old, he possessed an effortless magnetic authority that made the air around him feel charged. He did not wear the aggressively tailored pinstripe suits that Jamal favored to project importance. Instead, Harrison was the physical embodiment of stealth wealth. He wore a simple, perfectly fitted navy cashmere blazer over a crisp white button-down shirt, paired with dark trousers that fell flawlessly over bespoke leather loafers. There were no flashy logos, no oversized buckles, and no ostentatious watches demanding to be looked at. Every single thread he wore whispered of quiet generational wealth and a bank account with more zeros than my family could even fathom. He buttoned his blazer with a swift, fluid motion, his dark eyes scanning the property before locking onto the front door. He began walking up the steps, his security detail falling into a loose protective formation behind him. Inside the spacious living room, absolute panic erupted. Patricia scrambled away from the window, desperately smoothing her hair and adjusting her silk blouse. Richard stood taller, puffing out his chest in a pathetic attempt to look like an authoritative figure. Jamal quickly set his premium bourbon down on a coaster, frantically wiping his sweating palms on his slacks. Madison checked her flawless reflection in a nearby silver mirror, her previous arrogance entirely vanished. The heavy oak front door swung open, pushed by the lead security guard, who then stepped aside. Harrison crossed the threshold, stepping into the grand foyer. The atmosphere in the room shifted violently, the air growing thick with anticipation and sheer terror. Patricia plastered on her most brilliant fake smile, stepping forward to intercept him. She opened her mouth, ready to deliver a fawning, rehearsed greeting. Richard extended a hand, preparing to introduce himself as the patriarch. Jamal hovered right behind them, eager to network with a man who clearly operated in a completely different stratosphere of finance. But Harrison did not even look at them. He bypassed my parents completely, walking right past Patricia's outstretched hand and Richard's eager posture as if they were nothing more than decorative statues. He ignored Madison's wide, awestruck eyes and Jamal's desperate attempt at eye contact. Harrison's gaze was locked entirely on me. He navigated through the living room, his presence parting the sea of stunned relatives until he reached the corner where I was standing. The room held its collective breath, watching the most powerful man they had ever seen walk directly toward the woman they had just spent the last 20 minutes verbally tearing apart. He stopped inches away from me, a warm, genuine smile breaking across his handsome face, completely transforming his previously cold executive demeanor. Harrison reached out gently, taking my hand in his. He did not care that I was wearing a simple, basic gray sweater or faded denim jeans. He did not care about the malicious whispers that had just filled the room. He lifted my hand, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to my knuckles. His eyes met mine, filled with an easy, reassuring warmth that grounded me instantly. "I am sorry I am late, Olivia," Harrison said, his deep, resonant voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "The board meeting ran longer than anticipated. I hope I did not keep you waiting." He released my hand and turned to face the room, resting his hand comfortably on the small of my back. The family stood in absolute shock. The heavy silence in the living room shattered as Patricia suddenly sprang into action. The sheer velocity of her personality shift was enough to cause intense whiplash. My mother practically shoved my father aside, rushing forward with a brilliant, wide smile that stretched tightly across her face. She frantically smoothed the front of her silk blouse one more time and extended both hands toward Harrison, her eyes wide with manufactured delight. She acted as though the cruel insults from just moments ago had never happened, completely erasing her previous hostility in the blink of an eye. "Oh, Harrison, it is an absolute honor to finally meet you," Patricia gushed, her voice pitching a full octave higher than usual as she stepped into his personal space. "Olivia has kept you a complete secret from us. I am Patricia, Olivia's mother. We are just so incredibly thrilled you could join our little family gathering today. It is such an absolute blessing to have you here in our beautiful home." Harrison accepted her hand with a polite, measured nod, though his posture remained perfectly guarded. "Thank you for the invitation, Patricia," he replied, his tone courteous but giving away absolutely no warmth. Richard quickly flanked his wife, desperate to establish his position as the ultimate patriarch of the estate. He puffed out his chest, adjusted his posture, and thrust his right hand forward, attempting to deliver a bone-crushing authoritative handshake. Harrison met the grip easily, his steady and unflinching demeanor making my father look like a nervous subordinate rather than a commanding host. "Richard," my father announced, booming his voice to project total confidence across the room. "Welcome to our home. I must say, seeing your security detail out there gave us quite a start. We are used to a very private, quiet life here at our lake house. But of course, a man in your highly esteemed position cannot be too careful in today's world. We completely understand the need for heavy protection." Patricia let out a shrill, nervous laugh, desperately trying to rewrite the toxic atmosphere they had established just moments prior. "You must forgive the noise when you walked in," she said, waving her manicured hand dismissively, as if she could physically erase the cruel toast Madison had just delivered. "We are a very passionate group. You know how siblings are. Madison and Olivia were just engaging in some loud family banter. We love to tease each other relentlessly. It is all out of deep affection, I assure you." I watched my mother lie effortlessly through her teeth, feeling a profound sense of disgust building in my chest. 10 minutes ago, I was a complete embarrassment, a dark stain on their pristine country club reputation. Now, simply because I was standing next to a man who commanded bulletproof vehicles, I was suddenly part of their affectionate family banter. Aunt Beatrice hovered nearby, clutching her empty wineglass, her face flushed red with embarrassment. She eagerly asked Harrison if he needed a drink, a comfortable chair, or perhaps a guided tour of the entire property. Harrison politely declined every single offer, keeping his hand resting firmly on the small of my back, silently communicating that his loyalty lay entirely with me. The hypocrisy was absolutely sickening, but watching them scramble in panic to accommodate the very man they had just called imaginary was deeply satisfying. The fawning display from my parents was suddenly interrupted by Jamal. He could not tolerate being sidelined for another second. For the past 2 years, Jamal had enjoyed the undisputed role of the wealthiest, most successful man in the room. He thrived on intimidating my father and mocking my lifestyle. Now faced with a legitimate venture capital chief executive, Jamal's massive, fragile ego demanded that he assert dominance immediately. He aggressively adjusted his tailored jacket, flashing his heavy gold Rolex deliberately as he stepped directly into Harrison's personal space. The lead security guard shifted his weight, his eyes locking onto Jamal with instant terrifying scrutiny, but Harrison raised a single finger, silently instructing the guard to stand down. Jamal extended his hand, clapping Harrison on the shoulder with aggressive, completely unearned familiarity. "Harrison, good to meet you, man," Jamal declared, using a loud, booming voice meant to command the attention of the entire room. "I am Jamal. I handle investment banking for a top-tier firm out of the city. I know exactly how brutal those high-level board meetings can be. When you are moving real capital, the clock does not dictate your schedule, the money does." Harrison did not smile. He simply looked down at Jamal's hand resting on his shoulder until Jamal awkwardly removed it. "Indeed," Harrison said softly. Jamal ignored the cold reception, desperate to network and prove his own financial worth. Madison hurried over to stand by his side, clinging to his arm to present them as the ultimate elite power couple. Jamal began firing off aggressive business, jargon layering, meaningless buzzwords together in a way that sounded highly impressive to my clueless parents, but revealed his sheer desperation to anyone who actually understood high-level finance. "I am heavily involved in restructuring debt portfolios and leveraging distressed assets," Jamal boasted, shifting his weight arrogantly from side to side. "In fact, I just closed a massive Series A funding round for a major tech conglomerate out in Austin. We are talking 9 figures. Pure synergy. Disruptive technology is where the global market is heading, but you know that already. We should hit the golf course tomorrow morning. I can get us a private tea time at my club. We can talk about market volatility, maybe find some lucrative areas where our portfolios align. I am always looking to bring heavy hitters into my private investment circles." I watched Jamal puff out his chest, completely unaware of how pathetic and desperate he sounded. He was attempting to speak as an equal to a man who literally shaped the tech industry in Silicon Valley. Harrison listened to the entire rambling pitch without interrupting once. His dark eyes evaluated Jamal with the clinical, terrifying precision of an apex predator, observing a very loud, very clumsy prey. Jamal began to sweat slightly under the intense scrutiny, his confident smile faltering at the edges. He quickly reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a thick, embossed business card, thrusting it eagerly toward Harrison. "Take my card." Jamal insisted, his voice a pitch higher and far more nervous than before. "Let us talk real money this weekend. I have some exclusive off-market opportunities that require aggressive capital. I think you and I could do some serious damage together." Harrison looked slowly at the business card, then looked back up at Jamal, letting a heavy, suffocating silence stretch across the luxurious living room. Harrison made no move to take the card. He left Jamal's hand hovering in the empty space between them, the thick embossed cardstock trembling ever so slightly. The silence stretched so tight it felt like it might snap and take the bay windows with it. Finally, Harrison tilted his head, his expression remaining perfectly serene, but carrying a heavy, lethal edge. "9 figures in Austin." Harrison repeated, his voice smooth and dangerously calm. "That is quite the claim, Jamal. Most major Series A rounds in that sector max out around 40 million, unless you are dealing with a highly exclusive syndicate of Tier 1 firms. Which lead partner structured your term sheet?" Jamal swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a rigid, panicky grin. "Well, you know how these non-disclosure agreements work. I cannot name the firm until the press release drops next Tuesday, but it is incredibly aggressive." "I see," Harrison replied softly. "And restructuring debt portfolios while simultaneously driving seed capital into disruptive tech. That is a fascinating dual mandate. Typically, distressed asset management and venture capital require entirely different regulatory compliance frameworks under the SEC. Are you operating under a dual registered broker-dealer, or is your firm exploiting a specific regulatory loophole?" Jamal's face flushed a deep, uncomfortable red. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The aggressive business jargon that had sounded so impressive to my parents just minutes ago had completely failed him. He was trapped under a microscope he did not even realize he had stepped under. He tried to laugh, a harsh, forced sound that echoed awkwardly in the silent room. "We keep our strategies proprietary, man. You know the game." "I do know the game," Harrison said, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave, stripping away the last illusion of politeness. "Which is why I know that true synergy does not require cold pitching a stranger in a living room. Keep your card, Jamal. I prefer to allocate my capital where the diligence matches the vocabulary." Harrison smoothly turned his back on Jamal, dismissing him with absolute devastating finality. He did not raise his voice. He did not use insults. He simply dismantled Jamal's entire financial identity with surgical precision. Jamal slowly lowered his hand, slipping the business card back into his jacket pocket. His ego was visibly shattered, his face burning with humiliation as Madison stared at him in utter confusion. My parents shifted uncomfortably on their feet, realizing the man they had worshipped as a financial genius had just been exposed as an amateur in less than 60 seconds. Harrison placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, guiding me slightly away from the stunned group. The security detail shifted seamlessly to accommodate our movement, maintaining a subtle but undeniable barrier between us and my family. Harrison leaned down, his voice dropping to a low private register meant only for me. "We do not have to stay here, Olivia. If this is too much, say the word. The jet is on standby at the private terminal. We can be in the air and back home before dinner even starts." I looked up into his dark, reassuring eyes. It was incredibly tempting to just walk out, to leave them all choking on their own hypocrisy and let them wonder about my life forever. But a cold, calculating determination had already taken root in my chest. I shook my head, offering him a small, genuine smile. "No," I replied softly. "I want to see this through. I am exactly where I need to be." Harrison nodded, his thumb tracing a soothing circle on my shoulder. "Whatever you want, I am right behind you." As he stepped back slightly to give me space, I let my gaze sweep across the room. My mother was whispering frantically to my father, casting nervous glances at the security guards. Jamal was aggressively downing the rest of his expensive bourbon, his hands still shaking from the verbal evisceration. They still thought I was just a lowly computer tech who had somehow gotten lucky by bagging a wealthy boyfriend. They had absolutely no idea who was actually standing in their living room. I do not fix Wi-Fi routers. I do not replace cracked laptop screens for a basic hourly wage. I am a highly paid digital forensics expert. I own a cybersecurity firm that generates massive revenue, and my primary client is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. When multinational corporations suffer catastrophic data breaches, they call me. When federal prosecutors need to trace millions of dollars hidden in offshore shell companies by white-collar criminals, they bring me in to crack the encryption. I spend my days dismantling digital fortresses, tracking illicit wire transfers, and exposing the exact type of financial predators Jamal pretended to be. My family equated success with loud, flashy consumption. They could not comprehend a world where true power operates entirely in the shadows. My plain clothes and quiet demeanor were not signs of failure. They were the essential tools of my trade. When you hunt dangerous people for a living, you learn very quickly that blending in is your greatest tactical advantage. Looking at Jamal now, my professional instincts flared to life. The excessive sweat on his brow, the desperate pitch for off-market capital, the frantic attempt to secure a financial lifeline from Harrison. That was not just the behavior of an arrogant man trying to show off. That was the erratic behavior of a man drowning in deep, unmanageable debt. He was cornered and he was panicking. My family thought I was the absolute failure, but as I watched Jamal pace nervously near the stone fireplace, I knew with absolute certainty that this house was built on a foundation of lies. And I was going to be the one to rip it all down. The heavy, suffocating tension inside the living room finally broke when Richard loudly announced that the patio grill was prepped and ready. My family immediately shifted into their outdoor entertainment roles. Patricia ushered everyone through the massive glass sliding doors, her forced high-pitched laughter echoing across the perfectly manicured lawn as she desperately tried to project the image of a flawless luxury lakeside barbecue. Madison clung tightly to Jamal's arm, dragging him toward the outdoor bar in a clear attempt to put as much physical distance between him and Harrison as possible. The security detail adjusted their positions, remaining unobtrusive yet controlling the perimeter. Harrison stayed by my side, politely declining my father's offer of cheap beer. He looked entirely out of place among the tacky nautical decor my parents favored, yet completely at ease in his own skin. The sun cast long shadows over the water, creating a picturesque illusion. I leaned into Harrison, resting my hand on his arm. I told him I was heading inside to raid my father's wine reserve in the den, needing something stronger. He offered to accompany me, but I shook my head, needing a brief moment of quiet away from the overwhelming performance outside. I slipped back through the glass doors, leaving the loud chatter and the smell of roasting meat behind. The interior of the lake house was blessedly cool and silent. My bare feet padded softly against the rich hardwood floors as I navigated the familiar hallways. This $4 million estate had been in our family for 2 generations, a sprawling testament to my grandparents' hard work and financial prudence. It was supposed to be a safe haven, a generational anchor. But walking through it now, the silence felt heavy and expectant, like a trapped breath waiting to be exhaled. I pushed open the heavy oak doors to the den. The room was bathed in the dim, golden light of the late afternoon, smelling faintly of old paper and expensive leather polish. I headed straight for the temperature-controlled wine fridge tucked into the far corner. Reaching for a bottle of Cabernet, my eyes swept across the massive mahogany desk dominating the center of the room. It had always been my grandfather's sacred workspace, but today it was cluttered in a chaotic, desperate mess. Jamal had clearly commandeered the desk as his own personal command center. A stack of physical mail was haphazardly shoved to one side, completely unorganized. In the middle of the desk, glowing brightly, sat Jamal's open laptop. He was so flustered by Harrison's verbal takedown that he rushed outside without engaging the lock screen. It was a rookie mistake, the kind of careless digital hygiene that made my professional skin crawl. I abandoned the wine bottle and took a slow, deliberate step toward the desk. My sharp digital forensics instincts flared to life instantly. For years, I had trained my brain to identify anomalies and spot the tiny cracks in a financial facade. I walked quietly around the heavy mahogany desk, my eyes scanning the physical disarray before even looking at the screen. The discarded mail caught my attention first. It was not the usual assortment of country club newsletters or premium credit card offers my parents loved to display. This was a thick, ominous stack of aggressively marked envelopes. I reached out my fingers lightly, brushing the edge of a glossy lifestyle magazine that had been hastily thrown over the pile. I slid the magazine away. Beneath it lay a heavy certified legal letter printed on stark, thick white paper. The bold red lettering across the top margin hit me like a physical punch to the chest. It was a formal notice of foreclosure. The document was issued by a prominent national bank, and it explicitly listed the address of this exact lake house. My heart slammed against my ribs. I quickly scanned the dense legal text. The estate was in active default facing imminent seizure due to severe sustained non-payment. This was not a minor billing error. This was a catastrophic financial collapse, and the legal warnings were absolutely final. I dropped the foreclosure notice back onto the desk, my breathing shallow and controlled. I turned my attention to the glowing screen of Jamal's unlocked laptop. He had left his email client completely open and maximized. It was a treasure trove of financial panic. The inbox was overflowing with urgent red flag messages that painted a horrifying picture of his so-called high-stakes investment banking career. I leaned closer, my eyes darting rapidly across the subject lines. There were no emails from top-tier venture capital firms. There were no secure documents outlining nine-figure tech acquisitions. Instead, the screen was littered with automated alerts from dubious offshore cryptocurrency exchanges. The subject line screamed of margin calls, liquidated assets, and severely overdrawn accounts. He was hemorrhaging money into highly volatile, unregulated digital black holes. Interspersed with the crypto alerts were relentless demands from aggressive collections agencies. They were not polite reminders. They were formal legal threats outlining intent to garnish wages and pursue aggressive litigation for massive unsecured personal loans. Jamal was not managing distressed assets. He was the distressed asset. He was drowning in a highly toxic cocktail of terribly bad bets, crushing high-interest debt, and relentless offshore gambling disguised as a legitimate investment strategy. I stared at the screen, piecing the puzzle together with cold, clinical precision. Jamal had leveraged everything to fund his lavish lifestyle and his dangerous trading habits. My parents thought he was a financial genius, keeping them in luxury. Madison thought she was married to an elite banking titan. But the digital footprint told the undeniable truth. He was a complete financial fraud, a truly desperate man who had somehow gotten his hands on the precious deed to my grandparents' estate and mortgaged it entirely into oblivion. The entire family legacy was burning to the ground, and I was staring directly at the matches he used to light the fire. I grabbed the certified paper off the mahogany desk, folding it into perfect thirds, and slid it into the back pocket of my jeans. The cardstock felt like a ticking time bomb against my skin. I left the laptop exactly as I found it, preserving the digital crime scene, and walked silently out of the den without making a single sound. The sounds of the barbecue were drifting in from the patio, loud and oblivious to the impending disaster. I needed to isolate Madison before Jamal realized he left his fraudulent life exposed on a bright screen. I found my sister in the chef's kitchen, standing alone by the industrial refrigerator. She was humming a cheerful tune, tossing fresh lemons into a crystal bowl for the cocktails. The diamonds on her wrist caught the overhead pendant lights. I walked over to the heavy oak kitchen doors and pushed them shut, cutting off the noise completely and utterly. The click of the latch made Madison jump. She spun around, her smile faltering when she saw the unyielding expression on my face. "What are you doing, Olivia?" Madison asked with immediate annoyance. "We have guests outside. You cannot just lock us in here." I did not answer right away. I walked across the polished marble floor until I stood 2 feet away from her. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the folded foreclosure notice, and held it up. "Tell me you know about this, Madison," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Tell me you are not as blind as Mom and Dad." Madison looked at the white paper, her eyes narrowing in confusion before genuine panic crossed her features for just a moment. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, reaching for it. I pulled my hand back, keeping the document out of her grasp. "I found it buried under a magazine on grandfather's desk, right next to Jamal's open laptop, which is flooded with liquidation alerts from unregulated crypto exchanges and threats from debt collectors." I took a step closer, backing her against the countertop. "This estate is a generational trust. Our grandparents built this property so this family would always have a safe foundation. 2 years ago, Mom harassed me for months, demanding I sign over my legal rights as a KEO trustee. She insisted that because I was a lowly computer tech, I lacked the financial literacy to manage a $4 million asset. She forced me to hand total control to your husband because he was supposedly the financial expert. She trusted him to protect our legacy." I snapped the paper sharply between my fingers. "And your financial expert husband just mortgaged our family history into oblivion to fund his gambling addiction. The bank is seizing this property, Madison. You are in active default and the timeline is running out." Madison stared at the red lettering on the document. For a brief second, I saw the sheer terror of financial ruin in her eyes. I thought she might break down, confess the truth, and ask for help. But the toxic programming in our family ran too deep. The terror vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of arrogant denial. She lunged forward, snatching the certified letter out of my hand. She crumpled the paper in her fist, her chest heaving with manufactured outrage. "You have no idea what you are talking about," Madison hissed, her voice vibrating with condescension. "You are looking at a single piece of paper and jumping to hysterical conclusions. Jamal is a high-level investment banker. He operates on a different financial plane than a blue-collar worker like you. This is not a default. It is a strategic bridge loan. He is leveraging stagnant physical assets to free up aggressive capital for a massive venture. It is standard corporate procedure." I stared at my sister, staggered by the sheer magnitude of her delusion in this precise moment. "Madison, a commercial bank does not send a certified notice of foreclosure for a strategic bridge loan. They send it when you stop paying your bills. I saw his email inbox. Your husband is being hunted by debt collectors. He is liquidating whatever is left to cover catastrophic crypto losses." "Stop lying," Madison shouted, slamming her hand against the marble island. "You are just jealous. You have always been insanely jealous of me. I have the perfect husband, the perfect wardrobe, and the perfect life at the country club. You brought some rich guy here today just to show off, and it is pathetic. You are snooping through my husband's private workspace because you cannot stand the fact that we are the successful ones. You want us to fail badly." "I do not have to want you to fail," I replied, my voice turning to ice. "You are already bankrupt. The bank is coming to put a lock on that front door, and your designer bags will not stop them." Madison stepped right into my face, her eyes blazing with unhinged denial. "Jamal is moving assets around for a massive return, and when the payout hits next week, we are buying a house twice this size. My husband is a financial genius, and you are just a bitter woman trying to ruin my happiness. You will not destroy my reputation." I looked into her manic eyes and realized the horrifying truth. Madison was not just a victim of Jamal's financial abuse. She was a willing, desperate participant in her own destruction. She would rather burn the entire family legacy to the ground than admit her luxurious lifestyle was completely fake. The gaslighting was so intense, so deeply ingrained, that she had fundamentally detached from reality. I stepped back, the cold realization settling over me. The trap was already sprung, and they were all going down with the sinking ship. There was absolutely nothing I could ever do to save them from this impending disaster. The morning sun broke over the lake, casting a deceptively peaceful and perfectly serene glow over the huge estate for day 2 of the family reunion. Patricia had orchestrated a lavish, incredibly expensive outdoor breakfast buffet on the sprawling stone patio, complete with a mimosa bar and a hired string quartet playing softly in the corner. The setup was designed to impress Harrison and broadcast our supposed elite status to the wealthy neighbors whose properties bordered ours. I sat at the wrought iron table sipping my black coffee and watched the performance unfold. My focus, however, was entirely locked on Jamal. The confident, arrogant investment banker from yesterday had completely vanished, replaced entirely by a man visibly unraveling at the seams in front of my very own eyes. Jamal was sweating profusely, despite the cool morning breeze coming off the water. He pushed his untouched eggs around his porcelain plate, his hand trembling so severely that his heavy gold Rolex clinked against the table. I observed him not as a sister-in-law, but with the cold, clinical eye of a digital forensics investigator profiling a white-collar suspect cornered by his own crimes. He was exhibiting every classic physiological tell of a fraudster whose runway had just expired. His eyes darted erratically. He compulsively checked his phone every 10 seconds, swiping down to refresh his screen, likely hunting for a miraculous wire transfer that was never going to arrive. When the screen inevitably remained blank, his jaw clenched and he would quickly gulp his mimosa, trying to drown the mounting panic. Madison sat beside him wearing a wide, manic smile that did not reach her eyes. She laughed too loudly at Richard's boring golf anecdotes, desperately attempting to project the image of a carefree socialite. She occasionally shot terrified, covert glances at Jamal's phone, confirming that my quiet but intense confrontation in the kitchen had rattled her deeply, even if she refused to admit it aloud. Patricia floated around the patio, completely oblivious to the financial death spiral happening at her own breakfast table. She continuously offered Harrison more pastries, oblivious to the quiet, protective perimeter his security detail had established near the garden. Harrison sat next to me, radiating calm authority, his mere presence amplifying Jamal's profound insecurity. I took another long sip of my dark coffee, mentally counting down the minutes. I knew how aggressive banking institutions operated when it came to multi-million-dollar defaults on high-value properties. The certified notice I had found yesterday was the final warning. The grace period was over, and the physical enforcement phase was imminent. Jamal checked his phone again, his face draining of all color. He abruptly stood up his chair, scraping violently against the stone patio. He muttered a disjointed excuse about needing to take an urgent international business call and practically sprinted toward the house. His desperation was palpable, a suffocating energy that finally caused Patricia to pause her hosting duties and frown in confusion. Before Jamal could reach the heavy glass doors, the sound of tires gripping the gravel driveway echoed loudly across the property. It was a sharp, aggressive noise that instantly commanded the attention of everyone on the patio. The string quartet faltered, the cellist missing a note as heads turned toward the front of the estate. Two vehicles pulled into the circular driveway, coming to a harsh, abrupt stop right behind Patricia's leased Mercedes. The first was a fully marked county sheriff cruiser, its red and blue light bar gleaming menacingly in the bright morning sun. The second was a nondescript slate-gray corporate sedan. The illusion of our perfect wealthy family sanctuary shattered in an instant. Two heavily armed, uniformed sheriff deputies stepped out of the cruiser, their hands resting casually near their utility belts. From the gray sedan emerged a man in a sharp, inexpensive suit clutching a thick manila folder. He had the unmistakable, hardened look of a corporate bank representative executing a hostile asset seizure. The music stopped entirely. The silence that fell over the patio was absolute, heavy with impending doom. Several affluent neighbors, who had been strolling along the property line, stopped in their tracks, their eyes wide with hungry curiosity. Patricia dropped her silver serving tongs, the metal clattering loudly against the stone. Richard stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation, ready to demand an explanation for this aggressive intrusion. The bank representative did not wait for a greeting. He marched directly up the stone steps onto the patio, flanked by the two armed deputies. He bypassed my sputtering father and locked eyes with Jamal, who stood frozen near the glass doors, looking like a man facing a firing squad. Jamal Davis, the representative, announced, his voice projecting clearly and professionally across the entire outdoor space, ensuring every family member and eavesdropping neighbor heard every single word. I am representing the primary lending institution holding the mortgage on this property. You have repeatedly failed to respond to our certified communications regarding your severe financial delinquency. Jamal opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, strangled sound emerged. His knees buckled slightly under the crushing weight of public exposure. Madison let out a sharp, terrified gasp, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. As the legal trustee of this estate, you are hereby served. The representative continued thrusting the thick manila folder directly into Jamal's shaking chest with brutal force. This property is now in active foreclosure due to multiple millions in defaulted leverage. The bank is officially seizing this asset. You and all occupants have exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises before we change the locks and authorize law enforcement to remove trespassers. The heavy legal papers slipped from Jamal's numb fingers, scattering across the patio stones like a spilled deck of playing cards. The truth was finally out, ugly and undeniable, laid bare under the morning sun for absolutely every single person to see and judge today, destroying all their perfectly fake suburban lives completely. The eruption of absolute chaos was sudden and instantaneous. Aunt Beatrice shattered the quiet morning stillness with a shrill scream. Her crystal champagne flute slipped from her manicured fingers and shattered against the stone patio, sending a spray of orange juice and expensive glass across the designer outdoor rug. She grabbed the sides of her face, staring at the scattered legal documents as if they were venomous snakes. My mother. Patricia lunged forward, waving her hands frantically toward the nosy neighbors watching from the property line. She hissed at Beatrice to lower her voice, desperately trying to salvage whatever tiny shred of country club dignity remained. My father Richard turned a completely dark red. The veins in his neck bulged as he grabbed Jamal by the shoulder, spinning him around with surprising force. Richard demanded an immediate and clear explanation. He barked at Jamal, expecting the arrogant investment banker to magically produce a logical business excuse. Jamal, however, was physically crumbling apart. His knees knocked together, and the heavy gold Rolex on his wrist suddenly looked like a cheap costume prop. Jamal held his hands up in a placating gesture, stammering through thick, terrified breaths. He swore frantically that it was a massive, unfortunate misunderstanding. He claimed it was a gross clerical glitch in the banking software. He tried to string together his usual aggressive financial jargon, babbling about automated margin calls, bridging liquidity, and temporary algorithm freezes. His voice cracked mid-sentence, sounding incredibly pathetic and weak. Madison clutched her oversized designer handbag to her chest like a life preserver. Tears ruined her flawless makeup, streaming down her cheeks as she begged Jamal to fix it. She pleaded with him to make a phone call and fire whoever made this stupid banking error. She looked around the patio, demanding that someone pick up the papers and throw them in the trash. Jamal reached down with trembling fingers, attempting to gather the scattered foreclosure notices. He babbled that his legal team would have the bank sued for defamation by noon. He promised Patricia and Richard that the estate was perfectly safe and that his 9-figure tech deal would clear any temporary holds the bank had mistakenly placed on the family trust. I sat perfectly still, watching the implosion with the detached analytical focus of a digital forensics expert reviewing a corrupted hard drive. Jamal was exhibiting the desperate flailing of a white-collar criminal who had finally run out of runway. He was trying to gaslight a commercial bank representative and 2 armed sheriff deputies with the same pathetic lies he used to pacify my ignorant parents. Harrison remained a steady, unmoving presence beside me. His security detail subtly shifted, forming a protective half-circle around us to ensure the escalating family panic did not physically breach our personal space. We simply watched as the bank representative adjusted his inexpensive suit jacket, thoroughly unimpressed by Jamal and his frantic, stammering excuses. The bank representative stepped forward, stepping deliberately on one of the dropped legal papers with his leather shoe. He possessed the cold, ruthless efficiency of a man who seized luxury assets for a living. He did not lower his voice. In fact, he projected it even louder, ensuring the affluent neighbors clinging to their fences absorbed every single humiliating detail. He flatly refused to entertain Jamal and his ridiculous claims of a banking error. The representative pulled a secondary ledger from his manila folder and read the devastating truth straight into the open air. He stated unequivocally that there was no clerical glitch and no pending tech deal to save them. He announced publicly that Jamal had leveraged multiple millions of dollars against the generational trust over the past 18 months. The representative systematically detailed how the funds were not placed in secure portfolios or legitimate investment vehicles. Instead, the bank had irrefutable proof that the entire equity of the $4 million estate had been drained through highly suspicious fraudulent wire transfers. The money was funneled directly into unregulated offshore cryptocurrency exchanges and completely lost in catastrophic high-risk trades. The representative looked Jamal dead in the eye and stated that the bank fraud department had already flagged the accounts for severe irregularities long before the final default occurred. Patricia let out a guttural sob, collapsing against a patio chair. Richard stood paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing silently, as the absolute magnitude of the financial ruin crushed him. The representative was relentless. He informed Jamal that the aggressive borrowing against a trust he did not originally own borders on federal financial crimes. The representative tapped his pen against his clipboard, finalizing the destruction of their false reality. He reiterated the absolute strictness of the 48-hour deadline. He told the family that the bank had already authorized a private asset retrieval firm to secure the premises. If the house was not completely vacated by Tuesday morning, the sheriff deputies would physically remove everyone from the property and confiscate any remaining possessions to cover the outstanding massive debt. Madison dropped to her knees on the stone patio, wailing loudly as the bank representative turned his back on the family forever. He walked down the stone steps, flanked by the two silent armed deputies, and returned to his slate-gray corporate sedan parked outside. The sheriff cruiser followed them down the long gravel driveway, leaving behind a thick cloud of dust and the total absolute wreckage of my family. The neighbors slowly backed away from their fences, eagerly running back into their own million-dollar homes to spread the juicy, scandalous gossip to the rest of the elite country club members eagerly waiting. The perfect suburban illusion was dead and buried forever. My toxic family stood shivering in the morning sun, surrounded by the undeniable legal proof of their absolute humiliating bankruptcy. I remained seated calmly, sipping the last cold drop of my black coffee, waiting for the real venom to inevitably turn in my direction today. I set my empty ceramic mug down on the glass table with a sharp clink that echoed across the ruined patio. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my gray sweater, and shifted my focus directly onto my parents. I fully expected a volcanic eruption of rage directed entirely at Jamal. I anticipated my father Richard grabbing Jamal by his expensive collar and physically throwing him off the stone terrace. I braced myself for my mother Patricia to unleash a flurry of devastating insults, screaming at the man who had just single-handedly annihilated her precious generational wealth. That was the predictable script of our toxic family dynamic. Whenever someone made an error, they were immediately crucified. But as I studied their faces, my digital forensics training kicked into high gear. I read people for a living, analyzing micro-expressions and behavioral tells during corporate fraud interrogations. What I saw on my parents' faces chilled me to the absolute bone. There was no betrayal in their eyes. There was no shock registering the catastrophic offshore cryptocurrency losses the bank representative had just publicly detailed. They did not look at Jamal with the burning hatred of victims who had just been brutally robbed. Instead, Patricia and Richard looked at each other with pure, unadulterated terror. It was the distinct, undeniable panic of co-conspirators who realized their massive cover-up had just spectacularly failed. My mother clutched her pearl necklace, her breathing ragged, but her gaze darted toward the property line where the wealthy neighbors had been standing, not toward the man who stole her home. My father shoved his hands deep into his pockets, his shoulders slumped in a posture of cowardly resignation rather than righteous fury. Jamal stood shivering near the outdoor bar, and neither of my parents moved a single inch to confront him. They were not surprised by the foreclosure. They were only terrified of the public exposure. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. I took a slow, deliberate step toward them, feeling the gravel crunch beneath my sneakers. The air felt suffocatingly heavy. Harrison flanked me instantly, his presence an immovable wall of support, as I prepared to tear the final rotting layer off this family. "You knew," I stated. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the lingering morning breeze like a scalpel. "You already knew about the foreclosure. You knew about the crypto losses and the massive debt." Patricia flinched violently as if I had struck her. She refused to meet my eyes, staring intently at the spilled orange juice and shattered crystal on the designer rug. Answer me, I demanded, stepping closer, closing the distance between us. The bank representative just told us Jamal funneled millions into fraudulent wire transfers and defaulted on the family trust. And neither of you look surprised. How long have you known that Jamal bankrupted this family? Aunt Beatrice gasped loudly from her corner, her hands flying to her cheeks. She looked from me to my parents, her mouth hanging open in utter disbelief. Richard, Patricia, tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not know this criminal was stealing our parents' house. My father finally snapped, his face contorting into a mask of defensive rage. He pointed a trembling finger at me. Do not speak to your mother in that tone, Olivia. You have absolutely no idea how complicated high-level finance is. We were handling the situation internally to prevent a massive public panic. Handling it? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that held zero humor. The bank just gave you 48 hours to pack your bags before the sheriff locks you out. That is not handling a financial crisis. That is actively participating in a massive cover-up. How long, Richard? Tell the truth. Madison scrambled up from the patio stones, her face streaked with black mascara. She rushed to Patricia, grabbing her arm desperately. Mom, tell her to shut up. Make her stop ruining everything. Patricia finally cracked under the immense pressure. Tears of intense self-pity streamed down her perfectly contoured face. 2 months. Patricia sobbed, her voice cracking as she confessed the ugly, devastating reality. Jamal came to us 60 days ago. He was in tears. He admitted he made some highly aggressive trades that went south. He begged us for a bailout to cover the margin calls. We tried to leverage our personal retirement portfolios, but the debt was simply too massive. The hole was too deep. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical disgust. You knew he committed fraud against the generational trust 2 months ago, and you did not call a lawyer. You did not report him to the authorities or seize control of the remaining assets to save the estate. If we reported him, he would go to federal prison. Patricia shrieked, her hands balling into fists at her sides. Do you have any idea what that would do to Madison? She is a prominent real estate broker. Her entire brand is built on luxury and success. Having a husband indicted for federal wire fraud would instantly destroy her career and her flawless reputation. We could not let her suffer like that. Richard stepped forward aggressively, attempting to justify their staggering cowardice. We had to protect our social standing at the country club, Olivia. Our friends, our colleagues, our entire elite network relies on the perception of absolute financial stability. If word got out that we lost the family estate to a bad crypto bet, we would be completely ostracized. We would be a laughingstock in our own community. We decided to let the bank quietly take the property so we could control the narrative. We were going to tell everyone we simply decided to downsize and sell the lake house off-market to a private buyer. It was the only way to save our dignity. It was insane. I stared at my father, letting the sheer absurdity of his words hang in the air. They were willing to lose a generational asset just to maintain a fragile, fake country club reputation. Patricia darted forward, grasping my forearm. She dropped her voice to a ragged whisper. Olivia, please. We cannot do this out here. Not in front of everyone. Come inside, just for 5 minutes. We need to speak as a family. A private, closed-door family matter. Harrison stepped forward, his eyes warning, while his lead security guard shifted to intervene. I held up my hand, signaling them both to stand down. I wanted to see exactly how deep this rotting rabbit hole went. I gave Harrison a very firm nod, silently assuring him I had complete control of the current situation. 5 minutes, I stated coldly, pulling my arm free from Patricia's desperate grip. My mother practically ran toward the glass patio doors, gesturing frantically for Richard, Madison, and Jamal to follow. I walked behind them, leaving the bright morning sun and the chaotic aftermath of the bank representative's visit. We moved quickly through the silent, tension-filled hallways of the estate until we reached my grandfather's mahogany study. The very same room where I had uncovered Jamal's fraudulent digital footprint just 24 hours ago. I stepped across the threshold and Richard immediately slammed the heavy oak doors shut behind us. The metallic click of the brass deadbolt echoed loudly. They were cutting me off from the outside world. Jamal slinked into the room, leaning his back heavily against the locked door, as if to guard the exit. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, his posture transforming from terrified fraudster to a cornered defensive animal. Madison stood directly beside my mother, crossing her arms defensively over her designer dress, her tear-streaked face twisting into a nasty scowl. They formed a tight, aggressive semicircle around me. I was completely cornered in the center of the room, surrounded by four people who had just spent my entire life treating me like disposable garbage. But I did not feel trapped. I felt like a predator watching the prey walk willingly into a cage. The air in the study felt stale and suffocating thick with the scent of old leather and fresh panic. Richard paced in front of the large window, pulling the heavy velvet curtains shut to block out any prying eyes from the patio. The room plunged into dim shadows. My family tightened their formation around me. Their faces were flushed, their eyes wide with a dangerous, erratic energy. They had locked me in, fully believing they still held the power to dictate my actions. Patricia was the first to strike. The tears and the begging vanished instantly, replaced by a hardened, demanding entitlement that made my skin crawl. She stepped right into my personal space, pointing a rigid finger at my chest. "You are going to fix this, Olivia," Patricia commanded, her voice dropping all pretense of maternal affection. "You will walk back to that patio and tell Harrison to write a check for $3 million today, before noon." I looked directly at her face, completely unblinking and entirely fearless. "Excuse me." Richard stopped pacing and turned to face me, nodding in fierce agreement with his wife. "Do not play dumb, Olivia. We all saw the vehicles he arrived in. We all know who he is. Harrison operates a venture capital firm with billions in liquid assets. $3 million is absolute pocket change to a man in his position. It is a rounding error. He can clear Jamal's debt with a single phone call to his wealth manager and save this family's honor." "Save your honor," I repeated, my voice deadly calm. "You want my boyfriend to pay off the massive federal fraud your son-in-law committed so you can keep pretending you are rich." Madison stomped her foot, her voice shrill. "It is the least you can do. You owe us. You sit judging me, but you have a billionaire wrapped around your finger. If you actually cared about your own sister, you would make him save my house. He loves you, does he not? If he loves you, he will pay the bank. If you refuse to ask him, you are deliberately choosing to make me homeless." Jamal pushed himself off the locked door, rubbing his hands together with a sickening display of arrogance. Even in the face of federal ruin, his massive ego refused to die. "Listen to me, Olivia. Tell Harrison it is not a handout. It is a strategic liquidity injection. I can draft a promissory note. Once my crypto assets unfreeze next quarter, I will pay him back with interest. He understands high-level leverage. Just get him to bridge the gap." "You are entirely delusional," I stated, shifting my icy gaze from Jamal back to my parents. "You want me to extort my partner to bail out a criminal?" Patricia grabbed my shoulders, giving me a violent shake. "You listen to me right now. This is your duty as a daughter. You have been a massive disappointment your entire life. You bring nothing to this family but embarrassment. But right now, you finally have a chance to make yourself useful. You will go out there, use whatever leverage you have over that man, and get us the money. If you let this estate go to the bank, if you let Madison lose her husband to a federal indictment, I will make sure you are dead to this family. We will disown you completely and permanently. You will write the narrative we give you, or you will have absolutely no one." They stood there, breathing heavily, fully expecting me to cave to their emotional terrorism, just like I did when I was a teenager. They fully thought the terrible threat of losing their toxic love would force me to surrender. I stared back at them, letting the silence stretch tightly across the dim study. Madison was the first to break it, launching into a performance that belonged on a theater stage. She collapsed dramatically against the edge of grandfather's mahogany desk, burying her face in her hands. Deep theatrical sobs echoed in the room, though her eyes remained entirely dry. "You absolutely cannot do this to me right here, right now, Olivia," Madison wailed, her voice quivering with manufactured devastation. "You cannot just stand there and let me become homeless. Where will I go? My entire reputation in the real estate market will be destroyed overnight. My wealthy clients will abandon me entirely. My friends at the club will laugh at me. I will lose absolutely everything I have ever worked for. You have this powerful billionaire standing right outside on the patio, It costs you absolutely nothing to ask him for a quick favor. If you turn your back on me right now, you are effectively destroying my life on purpose just because you have always been insanely jealous of my success. Jamal pushed off the heavy oak door, stepping forward with an appalling sense of entitlement. The absolute sheer audacity of the man was staggering. He had just been publicly exposed for defrauding a generational trust, yet he still operated under the dangerous delusion that he was the smartest person in the room. "Listen to your sister," Jamal commanded, puffing his chest out. "This is just a temporary liquidity crisis, Olivia. I took on the massive burden of managing this family's complex assets when nobody else stepped up. I took the bold risks to grow our wealth. Sometimes the market corrects aggressively, but real families insulate each other from volatility. That is exactly how generational wealth survives. You are holding a golden ticket out there on the patio. Bring Harrison in here, let me pitch the bridge loan, and we save the estate easily. You owe this family your absolute loyalty. You owe us the bailout. Do not be the reason this legacy burns to the ground just because you want to be stubborn and hold a childish grudge." Richard stepped up beside Jamal, placing a heavy hand on his son-in-law's shoulder in a sickening display of patriarchal solidarity. "Jamal is absolutely right," my father declared, his voice dropping into a stern, lecturing tone. "We sink or swim together as a unit. We protected you for years when you were struggling to find your way, when you were wasting your potential on fixing computers. We gave you a strong roof over your head and expensive food on the table. Now the family needs you to step up. This is your fundamental duty. You will not walk out of this room until you agree to secure those funds. Families protect their own, Olivia. They do not leave their own blood to be slaughtered by ruthless commercial banks." I kept my expression entirely neutral, absorbing the relentless wave of their extreme gaslighting. They truly believed they could rewrite reality by simply talking louder and crying harder. Patricia, noticing that my face remained an unyielding mask of stone, realized her usual tactics of emotional terrorism were failing to break my resolve. Her eyes narrowed into cold, calculating slits. She took a slow, menacing step toward me, dropping the hysterical mother routine and adopting the ruthless demeanor of a woman willing to scorch the earth to get her way. "You think you hold all the power right now because you brought a wealthy man to this property," Patricia hissed, her voice vibrating with pure malice. "But you are severely underestimating me, Olivia. You think Harrison actually respects you? You think a man of his incredible stature wants to be associated with a selfish, ungrateful daughter who leaves her own family to rot in the gutter. Powerful men like that value loyalty and family honor above all else. If you refuse to get that check right now, I will walk straight out to that patio, and I will have a very long, very detailed private conversation with him." She circled me slowly, her designer heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. "I will tell him exactly who you really are behind closed doors. I will tell him how you have always been a bitter, manipulative problem child. I will tell him how you continuously sabotage your sister out of sheer petty jealousy. I will explain that you are deliberately withholding a simple financial solution just to watch your own flesh and blood suffer. I will paint you as a toxic, unstable woman who completely lacks basic human empathy. How long do you think a billionaire CEO will stay with you? Once he realizes you are a deeply broken, malicious person, he will drop you before the sun sets." Madison suddenly stopped, her fake crying, a wicked, triumphant smile spreading across her tear-stained face as she realized her mother's strategy. "She is right, Olivia. We will ruin you. We will make sure Harrison knows you are a total fraud. We will tell him you are just using him for his money, just like you are trying to punish us with it. You will lose him today." "We are your blood," Patricia whispered, standing inches from my face, her breath hot against my cheek. "We know every single one of your flaws, every weakness, every insecurity. We can and we will dismantle your relationship piece by piece if you force our hand. You will go out there, you will play the loving, devoted daughter, and you will secure the $3 million from Harrison immediately. If you try to defy us, you will leave this lake house completely alone without a family, and without the man you brought to impress us. He will leave you without a second thought, because nobody wants a broken woman. The choice is yours, Olivia. Save us, or we destroy you, completely erasing your entire future forever." For a long, suffocating moment, the study remained absolutely silent. The threat hung heavily in the stale air, a toxic cloud of manipulation that had successfully controlled me for over 3 decades. I looked at Patricia's triumphant sneer, at Madison's malicious smirk, at Jamal's arrogant posture, and at my father's cowardly silence. They were waiting for the inevitable collapse. They were waiting for me to lower my head, apologize for my defiance, and scramble out to the patio to beg Harrison for a $3 million bailout. Instead, a strange, unfamiliar sensation bubbled up in my chest. It started as a sharp breath, then built into a quiet chuckle, and finally erupted into a full, loud, ringing laugh of pure, unadulterated liberation. I threw my head back and laughed so hard my shoulders actually shook. It was not a nervous laugh or a hysterical response to trauma. It was the cold, genuine laughter of a woman who had just watched her captors lock themselves inside a burning building while simultaneously threatening to take away her matches. The sheer breathtaking absurdity of their ultimatum was the absolute funniest thing I had heard in my entire life. Patricia physically recoiled her triumphant sneer, morphing into profound confusion. She glanced nervously at Richard, who stood frozen near the velvet curtains. Madison dropped her arms, her jaw going slack as she watched me laugh in the face of their ultimate threat. Jamal took a hesitant step backward, his false bravado faltering under the weight of my absolute amusement. They had fired their most devastating psychological weapon, and it had simply bounced off my armor. The invisible chains of guilt, shame, and obligation that had bound me to this family instantly shattered into dust on the hardwood floor. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, wiping a tear of mirth from the corner of my eye. I straightened my posture, suddenly feeling taller and more commanding than I ever had in my life. "Because that was a spectacular performance, Mother. Truly worthy of an award. You really believe you hold the power to destroy my relationship by telling Harrison I am a bad daughter. You actually think a man who commands private security details and dictates global market trends is going to be swayed by a desperate suburban housewife throwing a malicious tantrum?" I took a deliberate step toward Patricia, forcing her to retreat slightly. "Go ahead. Unlock that door, walk out to the patio right now, and tell Harrison everything you just threatened. Tell him I am ungrateful. Tell him I refuse to save this estate. Do you know what he will say? He will ask why a supposed high-level investment banker like Jamal needs his wife's sister to beg for charity. Harrison values competence, integrity, and absolute loyalty. He heavily despises parasites. If you try to poison him against me, you will only expose yourselves as the desperate financial leeches you are. You will look entirely pathetic." Patricia opened her mouth to argue, but no sound came out. The realization that she held absolutely zero leverage over me was visibly suffocating her. I turned my attention away from my shrinking parents and locked my gaze directly onto Jamal. The nervous sweat had returned to his forehead, gleaming in the dim light of the study. "But let us address the real issue here," I continued, my voice dropping into a razor-sharp register that commanded the entire room. "You all keep calling me a failure. You keep saying I fix computers for a living. You have spent years mocking my simple clothes and my boring career. You thought I was too stupid and too poor to understand the sophisticated financial world Jamal operates in." I stepped right into Jamal's personal space, radiating pure lethal authority. "I do not fix broken laptops, Jamal. I am a digital forensics expert. I own a highly specialized cybersecurity firm that contracts directly with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. When white-collar criminals hide stolen money in unregulated offshore accounts, federal prosecutors hire me to find it. When corporate executives commit wire fraud and try to scrub their digital footprints clean, I am the one who rips their firewalls apart and hands the unredacted evidence to the Department of Justice." The blood drained completely from Jamal's face. His eyes widened in absolute horror as the reality of my words slammed heavily into his chest. Madison let out a small, terrified gasp, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Richard and Patricia stared at me, completely paralyzed, unable to comprehend that the daughter they had labeled a massive failure was actually a top-tier federal contractor operating at the highest levels of law enforcement. I hunt financial predators for a living, I stated, my eyes never leaving Jamal's terrified face. I spend my days tracing illicit crypto liquidations, decoding encrypted ledgers, and building ironclad federal dossiers against men who steal millions and lie about it. Men exactly like you, Jamal. I let the heavy silence hang for a split second, ensuring the absolute weight of my profession crushed whatever remaining arrogance he had left in his body. His chest heaved with rapid, panicked breaths. So when you left your laptop wide open on grandfather's desk yesterday, swimming in liquidation alerts and final collections notices, I did not just see a struggling banker. I explained, my tone entirely clinical and unforgiving. I saw an active digital crime scene. You invited a digital forensics expert into the room where you committed your crimes, and you were too arrogant to even lock your screen. I did not just look at your emails, Jamal. I forensically dismantled your entire fake life. I reached into my simple canvas tote bag and pulled out my tablet. The sleek device felt cold and familiar in my hands. I tapped the screen once, unlocking it with biometric security protocols that Jamal could not even begin to comprehend. The bright glare of the display illuminated the dark study, casting harsh shadows across the terrified faces of my family. I swiped open a highly encrypted folder and turned the screen around, holding it up for all of them to see. It was not just a collection of emails. It was a comprehensive, meticulously structured visual map of total financial destruction. You thought your little offshore crypto exchanges were untraceable, Jamal, I said, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls. You assumed that routing the stolen trust funds through a series of decentralized wallets would effectively mask your theft. But you used the same recovery email address for your illicit trading accounts that you use for your country club membership. Your operational security is an absolute joke. It took me less than 20 minutes to bypass your pathetic two-factor authentication and pull the entire transaction history from the past 18 months. Jamal staggered backward, hitting the heavy oak door with a dull thud. He raised his hands defensively as if my tablet was a loaded weapon pointed directly at his chest. Madison let out a whimpering sound, clinging to the edge of the desk. Patricia and Richard stared at the screen, their eyes darting over the complex web of red lines and negative balances that I had mapped out. I stepped closer, forcing Jamal to look at the undeniable proof of his guilt. I traced the money, Jamal, I continued mercilessly. I watched the exact moment you liquidated my grandparents' physical assets and wired the capital to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. I mapped the exact hour you gambled that money on highly volatile alternative coins, hoping for a miracle return that would cover the massive crater you dug in your own personal finances. And I watched the exact millisecond the market tanked, triggering a catastrophic margin call that wiped out the entire $4 million generational trust. You did not lose it in a sophisticated market correction. You blew it at a digital casino because you are an arrogant amateur. My father Richard finally found his voice, though it lacked any of its usual booming authority. Olivia, stop this right now. He pleaded, his hands trembling slightly. We can fix this. We just need the bridge loan from Harrison. If you just show him the numbers, we can arrange a private repayment schedule. I snapped my tablet shut, cutting him off instantly. There will be no bridge loan, Richard, I stated, refusing to call him Dad. There will be no bailout. There will be no quiet off-market sale to save your pathetic country club reputation. You brought me into this locked room to extort me using threats of disownment and emotional manipulation. You told me it was my fundamental duty to save this family. But this family stopped existing the moment you decided to sacrifice my future to protect a criminal. Patricia stepped forward, her face twisted into a mask of pure desperation. She reached out, attempting to grab my wrist, but I smoothly sidestepped her pathetic grasp. You cannot do this to us, Olivia, she shrieked, her voice breaking. We are your blood. We raised you. You have a billionaire waiting outside. You have the power to make this all go away. Why are you choosing to be so vindictive to your own flesh and blood? I am not being vindictive, Patricia. I replied, my tone completely devoid of any sympathy. I am being accurate. You demanded that I use my influence over Harrison to secure $3 million. You demanded that I beg my partner to hand over his hard-earned capital to replace the money Jamal stole. But Harrison did not build a global venture capital empire by writing blank checks to desperate fraudsters. He built it by executing flawless due diligence. If I walked out to that patio and asked him for a single dime, he would immediately deploy his own forensic accounting team to investigate exactly why you need the money. I began to pace the room, commanding the space with absolute authority. They would find exactly what I found, I explained, mapping out their inevitable downfall. Harrison would see that your golden child son-in-law is a thief. He would see that you and Richard actively covered up a massive financial crime to protect your social status. He would see that you allowed a commercial bank to foreclose on a historic family estate rather than report the massive theft to the proper authorities. You think asking Harrison for money would save your delicate reputation. It would completely obliterate it on a massive corporate scale. Madison slumped onto the floor, her designer dress pooling around her like a deflated parachute. She buried her face in her knees, rocking back and forth. You are ruining my life, she sobbed loudly. You are taking everything away from me. You took it from yourself, Madison, I countered, refusing to entertain her manufactured victimhood. You wanted the luxury cars and the expensive jewelry so badly that you ignored every single red flag your husband displayed. You knew he was drowning in debt, and you chose to look the other way, because confronting the truth meant giving up your status. You built your entire identity on a mountain of stolen money, and now the mountain has collapsed. I turned back to my parents, delivering the final crushing blow to their manipulation. You threatened to disown me if I did not comply, I said, my voice ringing with absolute liberation. You threatened to tell Harrison I was a terrible, ungrateful daughter. But your threats mean absolutely nothing to me anymore. I do not need your approval. I do not need your fake family reunions. I do not need a seat at your toxic table. I built an incredibly successful life, completely independent of your conditional love and your endless criticism. I survived your emotional abuse, and I thrived in the shadows while you worshipped a criminal in the light. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere in the study finally broke, replaced by a stark, terrifying clarity. Patricia clamped her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with the realization that she had completely lost control of her designated scapegoat. Richard leaned heavily against the wall, looking like a broken hollow shell of a patriarch. Jamal remained pinned against the door, completely paralyzed by the sheer volume of evidence I possessed against him. I had systematically dismantled their psychological hold, stripping away their weapons of guilt and shame until they were left with absolutely nothing but their own impending ruin. I was no longer the quiet, plain daughter they could push around. I was the executioner of their false reality, and I was just getting started. I walked directly up to the heavy oak doors where Jamal was cowering in absolute fear. I did not raise my hand or make any sudden movements, but the sheer intensity of my gaze made him flinch violently. "Move out of my way," I commanded softly. He scrambled out of the way, pressing himself flat against the mahogany bookshelves. I reached out and gripped the brass deadbolt, feeling the cold metal under my fingers. Before I turned it, I looked back over my shoulder at the four people who had made my life a living nightmare for 33 years. "You thought you set a trap for me today," I said, delivering my final verdict before the real storm hit. "You thought you could lock the door and bully me into submission. But you locked yourselves in a room with the exact person who is highly trained to destroy white-collar criminals. I am not going to ask Harrison for a single cent. I am not going to save your estate. I am going to walk out of this room, and I am going to watch the bank take everything you own, because that is exactly what you deserve." I turned the deadbolt with a loud, definitive click. The sound echoed through the silent study, signaling the absolute end of their reign over my life. The door was unlocked, and the final phase of their destruction was officially underway. But before I pulled the heavy oak door wide open, I paused. I let my hand drop from the brass knob and turned back to face them one last time. Leaving them with just the knowledge of my profession was not enough. They needed to understand the absolute inescapable gravity of the evidence I had compiled. I lifted my iPad again, the screen illuminating my features in the dim study. "You see, Jamal," I said, tapping the glass surface to pull up a new highly encrypted dashboard. "A digital forensics investigation is not just about finding a missing password. It is about reconstructing an entire digital life. Let me walk you through exactly what I have been doing for the past 24 hours while you were busy drinking expensive bourbon and pretending to be a master of the universe." I swiped left, bringing up a timeline that stretched across the screen. It started the moment I arrived at this lake house. I connected to the local network and immediately noticed your device broadcasting unsecured traffic. You consider yourself an elite investment banker, yet you use a commercial-grade unencrypted router with default administrative credentials. Your personal laptop password was a combination of Madison's name and your wedding anniversary. It is the digital equivalent of leaving your front door wide open with a neon sign pointing to the vault. Jamal swallowed hard, his eyes glued to the glowing screen. Madison let out a soft, horrified gasp, realizing her special date was the key to their ruin. By midnight, while everyone in this house was fast asleep, I had already established a secure tunnel into your cloud backups. I continued, my voice steady and surgical. I bypassed your weak two-factor authentication by mirroring your trusted devices. I did not just look at your recent emails. I downloaded your entire server history. I traced every single missing dollar from the moment you took control of my grandparents' trust fund. You started small, skimming operational expenses to cover the lease on your luxury vehicles. But then the market shifted and you got desperate. I tapped a node on the screen, bringing up a complex flowchart of financial movements. I tracked the massive unauthorized withdrawals you made against the estate equity. You initiated the first major bridge loan exactly 7 months ago. You told my parents it was to secure a commercial real estate deal. But my software does not listen to your lies. My software follows the digital footprint. And your footprint led directly away from legitimate banking and straight into the dark web. Patricia leaned against Richard, her legs visibly shaking as the sheer scope of my surveillance became apparent. They had spent decades treating me like an ignorant subordinate, and now I was standing before them as the architect of their total destruction. "Let us break down your specific financial crimes, Jamal," I stated, shifting into the terrifying clinical precision I used when briefing federal prosecutors. You executed 7 fraudulent wire transfers between October and March. You routed the stolen trust capital through a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Apex Holdings LLC. You thought establishing a foreign entity would shield you from domestic audits. But you used your personal IP address to register the domain name, linking the fraudulent corporation directly back to the IP address of your downtown apartment. Jamal's knees buckled slightly, his back scraping against the bookshelves. He was suffocating under the weight of his own amateur mistakes. Once the funds cleared the Cayman accounts, you immediately dumped them into unregulated offshore cryptocurrency exchanges. I continued swiping to a ledger of encrypted wallet addresses. You attempted to use coin mixing services to tumble the digital assets, hoping to break the chain of custody so the bank could never recover the original capital. But you failed to account for the blockchain's immutable ledger. I ran your wallet addresses through our proprietary tracking algorithms. I watched you purchase highly leveraged synthetic crypto derivatives. You were trading on 100 times margin, essentially betting millions of stolen dollars on random decentralized tokens with zero underlying value. Madison buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with silent, genuine panic. The designer lifestyle she had worshipped was built entirely on a foundation of massive, easily traceable fraud. When the crypto market suffered a flash crash 3 months ago, your positions were instantly liquidated. I explained, my voice echoing coldly off the study walls. The exchanges automatically seized your collateral to cover the catastrophic losses. The money did not just vanish into thin air. It was legally absorbed by foreign entities to settle your incredibly stupid gambling debts. You wiped out $4 million of generational wealth in a matter of seconds, and you left a blazing digital trail pointing directly back to your personal devices. I locked eyes with my father, making sure he understood the exact nature of the criminal he had chosen to protect. This is not a civil dispute, Richard. This is not a simple banking error that can be fixed with a quick check from Harrison. This is federal wire fraud. This is international money laundering. This is a textbook violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The paper trail is absolute, undeniable, and currently sitting on this very tablet. I turned my gaze back to Jamal, delivering the final clinical assessment of his doom. You left behind extensive connection logs, unencrypted chat histories with offshore brokers, and verifiable digital signatures on every single fraudulent wire transfer. Federal agents do not care about your country club reputation. They care about the unredacted evidence. And I have mapped out every single felony you committed with absolute terrifying clarity. Your entire financial facade has been systematically dismantled by the exact same woman you mocked, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to hide your blatant, unforgivable guilt anymore. The game is completely over, and you have officially lost everything today. I watched Jamal process the absolute finality of his ruined life. His chest heaved erratically, and his expensive tailored suit hung on him like a crumpled paper bag. He believed I had fired my last bullet. He truly thought the exposure of the corporate wire fraud and the loss of the generational trust was the absolute bottom of this nightmare. He was wrong. The financial ruin of my family estate was just the warm-up. I adjusted my grip on the iPad and swiped my finger across the glass screen one final time. A new folder opened, displaying a stark, terrifyingly dense matrix of private financial data. You thought I stopped digging when I found the offshore crypto accounts, I said, my voice dropping to an icy, lethal whisper that forced everyone in the study to lean in. You assumed I only cared about the $4 million you stole from my grandparents. But when a digital forensics expert enters a compromised network, we do not just look at the primary breach. We scan the entire ecosystem for secondary infections. And what I found buried in a hidden, encrypted partition on your hard drive was so much worse than simple corporate embezzlement. Jamal's eyes darted frantically toward the screen. The remaining color drained completely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He knew exactly what file I had just opened. When I ran a deep forensic sweep of your personal devices, I noticed a distinct anomaly in your encrypted browser history. I explained, projecting my voice clearly to ensure my parents heard every single devastating syllable. I found repeated access logs to the dark web. Specifically, I found entry nodes routing directly to underground black market credit forums. That struck me as highly unusual for a man who claimed to manage elite venture capital. So, I ran a comprehensive cross-reference with national credit bureaus. I pulled your credit, Madison's credit report, and then, just to be entirely thorough, I pulled my own. I turned the high-resolution screen directly toward my mother, Patricia, forcing her to look at the undeniable digital proof. Jamal did not just drain the family trust. He committed aggravated identity theft. He stole my social security number. Madison let out a sharp, piercing gasp, stumbling backward until she hit the edge of the mahogany desk. No, she whispered, shaking her head in frantic denial. No, Jamal would never do that. He makes his own money. Your husband does not make money, Madison. He steals it. I countered, instantly shutting down her pathetic delusion. Your joint credit scores were completely obliterated 2 years ago. You maxed out every single platinum card you owned to fund your lavish country club lifestyle, your designer wardrobes, and your leased luxury vehicles. When the legitimate banks finally cut you off, Jamal needed a fresh, untainted financial profile to open secondary loans and secure black market credit lines. I needed a pristine identity, so he stole mine. I tapped a document on the screen, magnifying a fraudulent loan application. He used my social security number combined with a synthetic identity profile to open 6 different high-yield credit accounts. He leveraged my perfect credit history to borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars just to keep your fake, luxurious suburban facade from crumbling into the dirt. Jamal pressed himself flat against the heavy oak doors, looking desperately for an escape route that did not exist. He was completely trapped, pinned down by the undeniable weight of federal felonies. But the true horror of this revelation was not just what Jamal had done, it was who had allowed him to do it. I slowly turned away from the trembling fraudster and locked my cold, unforgiving gaze onto my father, Richard. He was staring at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. His cowardice was absolutely sickening. But that is not even the darkest secret in this room, I stated, my voice echoing with pure, unfiltered disgust. When I traced the digital footprint of the identity theft, I pulled the communication logs between Jamal's private email server and your personal inbox, Richard. I ran a targeted keyword search, and I found the exact moment you discovered what he had done. Patricia let out a muffled sob, burying her face in her trembling hands. She knew exactly what I was about to say. 2 months ago, when Jamal confessed to losing the estate in the crypto crash, he also confessed to the identity theft. I revealed, exposing their ultimate unforgivable betrayal. You knew he had stolen my social security number. You knew he had saddled me with massive fraudulent black market debt. You sat in this exact study, looked at the evidence of my ruined financial future, and you consciously decided to do absolutely nothing. Olivia, try to understand, Richard pleaded, his voice cracking under the immense pressure of his own guilt. If we reported the identity theft to the authorities, the police would have investigated everything. The entire financial collapse would have become public record. Madison would have been implicated in the fraud. We had to protect her. You had to protect her. I repeated the words, tasting like poison on my tongue. You looked at your 2 daughters and you made a calculated, cold-blooded decision. You deliberately sacrificed my entire financial future, my credit and my fundamental security, just to save Madison from facing the absolute consequences of her own fake lifestyle. You actively protected a federal criminal who stole my identity simply because you did not want to be embarrassed in front of your wealthy friends at the country club. Patricia dropped to her knees, weeping openly onto the expensive hardwood floor. We thought we could fix it silently, she wailed, offering the most pathetic excuse I had ever heard. We thought Jamal could somehow earn the money back and quietly pay off the fraudulent accounts in your name before you ever found out. We never wanted to hurt you, Olivia. We just wanted to save the family. You did not want to save the family, I corrected ruthlessly, looking down at the broken woman who gave birth to me. You wanted to save your illusion. You were entirely willing to let me take the fall for massive federal bank fraud. You were willing to let my life burn to ash, just so Madison could keep wearing designer dresses and you could keep bragging to your superficial friends. I stepped back, surveying the absolute wreckage of the people who were supposed to love and protect me. You demanded that I beg my partner for a $3 million bailout out of some twisted sense of family loyalty. But you possess no loyalty. You are not my family. You are simply the people who sold me to a thief to protect your own pathetic vanity. And now you are going to pay the ultimate price for that betrayal. The absolute finality of my words hung in the stale air of the study. Jamal stood frozen against the heavy oak doors. His breathing grew jagged. The arrogant investment banker persona evaporated, leaving a terrified, cornered animal. His eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an exit, a loophole, a desperate lie that could save him. He found nothing. He looked at my father, who was staring blankly at the floor. He looked at Madison, who was sobbing uncontrollably. And finally, his manic gaze snapped back to the glowing screen of the iPad in my hand. The device held his entire criminal record. It held his prison sentence. Something dark and primitive snapped inside his brain. Self-preservation overrode his remaining rational thought. His face contorted into pure rage. He let out a guttural, furious roar that echoed violently off the mahogany walls. You are bluffing, Jamal screamed, his voice cracking under the intense strain of his panic. You cannot prove any of this in a real court. I will hire the best defense lawyers in the country. I will claim my network was hacked. I will say you planted those files to frame me because you are a jealous, bitter spinster. He pushed off the door, his fists clenching until his knuckles turned stark white. You are not going to ruin my life, Olivia. I will destroy that tablet. I will smash it into a million pieces, and I will make sure you never work in this industry again. You hear me? Give me that device right now. He did not wait. Jamal lunged forward, propelling his entire body weight across the luxurious Persian rug. His shoes slipped on the hardwood floor, but his momentum carried him toward me. His arms reached out, his fingers, hooked like claws, aimed straight for the iPad I held against my chest. Patricia screamed a sharp, piercing sound of absolute terror, scrambling backward to avoid the sudden burst of violence. Richard raised his hands but remained frozen in place, entirely useless in a crisis. Madison shrieked for her husband to stop, but Jamal was completely lost to his own blinding desperation. He was mere feet away, his face twisted in vicious determination. I did not flinch. I did not scream or attempt to run. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly rigid, anticipating the physical impact. I knew that destroying a single physical tablet would do absolutely nothing to erase the encrypted, heavily secured federal dossier I had already compiled. His ignorance regarding basic cloud infrastructure was just another proof of his profound incompetence. But Jamal was not thinking about cloud backups. He was consumed by the primitive need to destroy the physical object in front of him. His heavy right hand swung forward with immense force, aiming to knock me backward and violently snatch the device from my firm grip. Before Jamal could lay a single finger on me, the heavy oak doors of the study exploded inward with a deafening violent crash. The brass deadbolt splintered, instantly tearing out of the wooden doorframe and sending shards of mahogany flying across the room. The breach sucked the air out of the study. Harrison's private security detail swarmed into the room with terrifying, lethal precision. They moved faster than my eyes could fully process. The lead guard, the towering man who had opened the SUV door earlier, closed the distance in a fraction of a second. He did not shout commands or issue warnings. He simply executed his directive. The guard hit Jamal like a freight train, driving his broad shoulder directly into the center of Jamal's chest. The brutal impact lifted Jamal off his feet. His breath left his lungs in a sharp, painful wheeze. They crashed violently onto the hardwood floor, sliding across the room, until Jamal's back slammed hard against the base of my grandfather's massive desk. The second security contractor moved in instantaneously, dropping his heavy knee onto Jamal's spine and pinning his arms forcefully behind his back. The threat was neutralized in less than 3 seconds. Jamal was pressed flat against the floor, gasping for air, his expensive tailored suit twisted and ruined. He thrashed weakly against the unyielding weight of the highly trained guards, but he was completely immobilized. Madison screamed hysterically, rushing forward to help him, but the third security operative stepped smoothly into her path. He held up a firm, uncompromising hand that forced her to immediately halt her approach. Richard and Patricia cowered in the corner, completely paralyzed by the swift, overwhelming display of tactical force taking place in their home. Then Harrison stepped calmly through the shattered doorway. The chaotic noise in the room instantly evaporated, replaced by a suffocating, heavy silence. Harrison adjusted the cuffs of his navy cashmere blazer, his demeanor so impeccably calm, it was genuinely frightening. He did not look at the screaming Madison or my trembling parents. He looked at Jamal, who was groaning in pain on the floor. Harrison exuded the cold, entirely untouchable danger of a powerful man who controlled massive global empires. He walked slowly across the room, his leather shoes stepping deliberately over the splintered remains of the door lock. He stopped directly in front of me, placing his body firmly between me and the rest of my toxic family. He gently touched my arm, his dark eyes scanning my face to ensure I was completely unharmed. I gave him a reassuring nod. Harrison turned his attention back to the floor. He looked down at Jamal with an expression of pure clinical disgust, observing the fraudster, as if he were an insect that had just crawled out from under the floorboards. The contrast between Jamal's pathetic, struggling form and Harrison's effortless, commanding power was absolute. Jamal had desperately tried to assert his dominance through sudden violence, and in return he was shown exactly what real, unyielding authority truly looked like. Harrison stood tall, radiating an icy menace that froze every single person in the room. Harrison stood tall, radiating an icy menace that froze every single person in the room. He looked down at Jamal with the detached fascination of a scientist observing a deeply flawed, highly destructive specimen. Jamal struggled aggressively against the heavy knee of the security contractor pressing into his spine, his expensive tailored suit jacket tearing loudly at the shoulder seam. He gasped for air, spitting out weak, Fragmented threats about calling the local police for assault and suing everyone in the room for millions. Harrison did not even blink. He slowly lowered himself into a crouch, resting his forearms on his knees, so he could look Jamal directly in the eye, bringing his face dangerously close to the man thrashing on the hardwood floor. You have a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation you are currently in, Harrison said, his voice smooth, resonant, and remarkably quiet, forcing everyone in the study to strain to hear him over Jamal's pathetic wheezing. You actually believe you just had a minor domestic dispute. You think you can call a local lawyer, claim you were roughed up by private security, and spin this into a civil lawsuit to buy yourself some time. That is the desperate mentality of a low-level street hustler, Jamal. It is exactly why you failed spectacularly in the actual financial sector and resorted to stealing from a generational trust just to maintain a fragile illusion. Harrison stood back up, his immaculate loafers stepping carefully around Jamal's trembling hands. He turned his attention to my parents. Patricia was trembling violently, clutching Richard's arm for a support he was entirely incapable of providing. Richard simply stared blankly, a broken patriarch watching his empire crumble. Richard, Patricia. Harrison addressed them, saying their names with a heavy dose of clinical pity that made my mother flinch. You spent your entire lives curating a flawless country club image. You looked down on Olivia because she did not fit your incredibly narrow, superficial definition of success. You pushed her aside and forced her to hand over your family legacy to a man who masks his profound incompetence with loud suits, stolen money, and aggressive jargon. But what you failed to realize is that the woman you discarded is one of the most lethal digital investigators in the entire country. Harrison walked over to the mahogany desk, picking up the iPad I had left resting near the edge. He held it up, displaying the dense, encrypted financial map I had built, allowing the blue light to illuminate his sharp features. Olivia was not just snooping through a laptop to win a petty family argument. Harrison explained, his tone ringing with absolute, unyielding authority. She does not deal in domestic revenge. When she accessed Jamal's unsecured network last night, she immediately initiated a secure, encrypted chain of custody protocol. Every single file she downloaded, every offshore bank account she traced, and every fraudulent wire transfer she mapped was automatically hashed and verified. She was not just looking at your son-in-law's terrible financial mistakes. She was actively compiling an airtight, heavily classified federal dossier. She gathered enough unredacted evidence to put him away for decades. Madison let out a loud, tragic wail from the corner of the room, realizing the catastrophic weight of Harrison's words. The reality of her impending poverty was finally setting in. "You cannot do this," Madison sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at me while wiping away rivers of dark mascara. "You are just trying to scare us. You cannot send my husband to prison. We will lose everything we own." "She does not have to send him anywhere, Madison," Harrison interjected, shifting his dark, imposing gaze directly to my sister. "Because I already handled the logistics." Harrison casually checked the slim platinum watch on his wrist, reading the time with a devastating precision that made the air in the room feel incredibly thin. "While you were all out on the patio sipping mimosas and making cruel toasts about Olivia's wardrobe, my corporate legal team in Silicon Valley was executing a very specific, highly coordinated set of instructions. Olivia finished compiling the digital evidence package at exactly 6 o'clock this morning. We did not bring that data here to blackmail you or demand an apology. We brought it here as a professional courtesy to look you in the eye before the inevitable occurred." Jamal stopped, struggling against the floor. A horrifying, hollow realization washed over his face as the last shred of his arrogant delusion finally evaporated. His breathing slowed to a terrified crawl. 2 hours ago," Harrison announced, delivering the ultimate checkmate with a voice like cracking ice, "my lead general counsel initiated a direct, secure transmission to the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as well as a senior investigator at the Securities and Exchange Commission. The entire encrypted dossier, mapping out the offshore cryptocurrency laundering, the unauthorized trust liquidations, and the aggravated identity theft using Olivia's social security number, has already been processed by federal authorities. Patricia shrieked a raw, ugly sound that tore through the quiet study and echoed in the hallway outside. No, Harrison, please, you have to stop them. You are a billionaire. You have massive connections. Call your lawyers back and tell them to cancel the transmission. We will do whatever you want. We will sign whatever papers you need to sign over the house. Just do not let the government take him away. It will ruin us completely. Harrison looked at my mother with a profound, chilling emptiness, showing absolutely no mercy for a woman who had offered none to her own daughter. You cannot unring a federal bell, Patricia. The machinery is already in motion. The moment the SEC and the FBI verified the digital signatures on those Cayman Island wire transfers, Jamal became an active target of a multi-agency federal investigation. Warrants are currently being expedited by federal judges. Subpoenas are being drafted for every single bank account associated with this estate. Even if I wanted to stop this, which I absolutely do not, I possess no power to halt a federal indictment of this magnitude. Richard slumped heavily against the velvet curtains, his face turning an unhealthy ashen gray. We are entirely ruined, my father whispered, his voice cracking, as the reality of public, inescapable humiliation crashed down upon him. The country club will ban us immediately. The wealthy neighbors will see the raid. Everything we built over 40 years is entirely gone. You destroyed your own foundation, Richard, Harrison replied sharply, refusing to let my father play the victim. You discovered a man who stole your daughter's identity, and you consciously chose to protect him to save face. You sacrificed Olivia's future for your vanity. You deserve every ounce of the public disgrace that is coming to your doorstep today. Jamal squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his cheek against the cold hardwood floor. He finally understood that there was no bridge loan, no quiet settlement, and absolutely no escape route. The walls of the study had officially become the walls of a federal penitentiary. My security team will hold him here until law enforcement arrives, Harrison stated, walking back over to stand firmly by my side. He took my hand, his grip warm and fiercely protective. Your family thought they could trap you in this room and force you to surrender. They thought they could use my wealth as a band-aid for their criminal behavior, but they severely underestimated both of us. The trap is closed, and you are the only one walking out of it completely free. As the absolute finality of Harrison's words settled into the quiet study, a faint, high-pitched wail breached the heavy, insulated walls of the lake house estate. At first it was just a distant hum drifting across the water, easily mistaken for a passing ambulance on the main highway. But the sound multiplied rapidly, overlapping and amplifying, until a chorus of aggressive sirens tore through the quiet suburban morning. The piercing noise grew deafeningly loud, vibrating violently against the window panes. Flashing red and blue strobe lights cut through the narrow gaps in the heavy velvet curtains, casting frantic, erratic shadows across the mahogany bookshelves and the terrified faces of my parents. The authorities had arrived. The heavy footfalls of multiple armed officers thundered across the front porch. Because the deadbolt on the study door had already been obliterated by Harrison's security detail, there was nothing to impede their entry. The ruined doors swung wide open, revealing a highly coordinated tactical entry team. Local county sheriff deputies rushed into the room to secure the immediate perimeter, their hands resting cautiously on their service weapons. Right behind them strode 3 federal agents wearing crisp, dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters of the FBI emblazoned across their backs. They moved with a chilling, synchronized efficiency that instantly drained whatever oxygen remained in the room. The lead federal agent, a tall woman with a severe expression and a thick tactical vest, stepped forward and assessed the scene. She locked eyes with Harrison, who gave a brief acknowledging nod. Harrison gestured silently to his private security contractors. They immediately stepped back in perfect unison, lifting their knees and releasing their physical hold on Jamal. Jamal gasped greedily for air, attempting to roll onto his side, but he was not given a single second to recover. 2 federal agents seized him by the shoulders, hauling his dead weight roughly to his feet. His incredibly expensive custom-tailored suit was heavily torn at the seams, covered in dust and floor wax. The arrogant investment banker who had mocked my simple clothing just an hour ago now looked utterly pathetic, completely stripped of his false wealthy armor. The sharp, mistakable click of heavy steel handcuffs, ratcheting tightly around his wrists, echoed through the silent room. The lead agent recited Jamal his Miranda rights in a loud, monotonous voice that finalized his total destruction. They marched him forcefully out of the study, dragging him through the grand foyer and right into the center of the living room. I followed closely behind Harrison, stepping out to watch the culmination of my digital investigation. The scene in the living room was pure, unadulterated humiliation. Aunt Beatrice was standing completely frozen near the shattered remains of her champagne glass, both hands clamped firmly over her mouth, her eyes bulging in sheer absolute horror. She watched the golden son-in-law, the man they had all worshipped as a financial deity, being paraded through the house like a common street thug. The agents pushed Jamal through the front doors and out onto the grand portico. The entire neighborhood had mobilized. Affluent residents from adjacent properties were practically hanging over the manicured hedges, holding up their smartphones to record the spectacular, devastating downfall of our prestigious family. The flashing police lights reflected brightly off the heavy gold Rolex still strapped to Jamal's restrained wrist, highlighting the ultimate irony of his fake, luxurious existence. They shoved his head down, forcing him into the back of a federal transport vehicle, completely slamming the heavy door on his fraudulent life. Back inside the grand foyer, the brutal reality of the situation finally registered in Madison's deeply delusional brain. She watched the federal vehicle secure her husband and her knees completely buckled beneath her. She collapsed violently onto the expensive hardwood floor, her designer dress pooling around her legs like a deflated parachute. She did not just cry, she broke down into loud, ugly, hysterical wails that echoed painfully off the high vaulted ceilings of the lake house. She scrambled across the floor on her hands and knees, desperately reaching out with trembling fingers to grab the hem of my denim jeans. "Olivia, please, you have to stop them!" Madison shrieked, her voice tearing at the seams, her perfectly applied mascara running down her cheeks in thick, dark rivers. "Call your lawyers right now. Tell them it was all a massive misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized the wire transfers. Tell them you gave him permission to use your social security number. You have to call them and drop the charges. Please, I am begging you. He is my husband. We are your family. You cannot just stand there and let them take him away to federal prison. I will lose everything. I will be completely homeless." I looked down at the golden child of the family, the sister who had spent her entire 30 years of life stepping on my neck to elevate her own status. The sister who had just gleefully threatened to ruin my relationship with Harrison not even 20 minutes ago. I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy. I did not feel pity. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, sterile emptiness. I slowly stepped backward, pulling my jeans entirely out of her desperate, grasping reach. "You cannot undo a federal crime by making a phone call, Madison," I stated, my voice echoing with a flat, clinical finality that sliced right through her hysterical sobbing. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not care about your country club reputation, and they certainly do not care about family loyalty. I did not press charges that can be magically dropped. I simply handed them an encrypted digital map of the massive, unyielding fraud your husband committed. The government is the one prosecuting him now. Jamal stole millions of dollars, he defrauded a commercial bank, and he committed aggravated identity theft to fund your pathetic, shallow obsession with luxury. You chose to marry a criminal, and Mom and Dad chose to protect him. This is the bill coming due." Patricia let out a loud, agonizing cry from the doorway of the study, leaning heavily against Richard as the utter devastation of my words sank in. I kept my eyes locked solely on my sister, ensuring she understood the permanent, unbreakable boundary I was establishing right here and now. "I am not your savior, Madison, and I am no longer your scapegoat." I continued, my tone ringing with absolute, unshakable authority. "You wanted to live a life built entirely on lies, and you fully expected me to quietly take the fall when those lies collapsed. You expected me to absorb the catastrophic financial ruin so you could keep wearing your diamond bracelets. But I refused to burn myself alive to keep you warm. You are going to face the severe, crushing consequences of your own massive delusion. I am completely done fixing this family's mistakes. I am done accepting your abuse. From this exact second forward, you have absolutely nothing to do with me. I turned my back on her sobbing form, entirely undisturbed by the frantic pleading cries echoing through the empty seized estate. The boundary was permanently set in stone, and there was no force on earth that could ever make me cross back over it. As I pivoted away from Madison and her pathetic, echoing sobs, my gaze landed directly on my parents, the grand foyer of the lake house, once a pristine monument to their carefully curated generational wealth, now felt like the staging ground for their ultimate burial. Richard stood completely paralyzed against the expensive flocked wallpaper. His shoulders, usually pulled back in a display of arrogant suburban dominance, were completely hunched. Tears streamed silently down his weathered cheeks, carving clean lines through the grayish pallor of his skin. He was weeping not for the daughter whose identity had been stolen, but for the utter destruction of his own fragile kingdom. Patricia, however, was not paralyzed. Her shock rapidly metastasized into a blind, vicious fury. She pushed herself away from the wall, her designer heels slipping slightly on the polished hardwood floor. Her face was a terrifying mask of smeared cosmetics and raw, unadulterated hatred. She pointed a trembling, rigid finger directly at my chest, her chest heaving as she sucked in ragged breaths. "You absolute monster!" Patricia screamed, her voice tearing through the cavernous foyer with the force of a physical strike. "You planned this entire spectacle. You brought that billionaire here just to watch us burn. You knew the federal agents were coming, and you stood in my study pretending you were just a victim. You deliberately orchestrated this public execution." She advanced another step, her hands curled into tight fists. "Look outside, Olivia. Look at the driveway. The entire neighborhood is standing on their lawns with their phones out. The country club board members live next door. Do you have any idea what you have just done to us? You have completely destroyed this family. You have ruined our reputation forever. We are a total laughingstock. We will be permanently banned from every social circle we have spent 40 years cultivating. Our friends will never speak to us again, and it is entirely your fault." Patricia's voice cracked into a hysterical, high-pitched shriek. She gestured wildly toward Madison, who was still curled in a miserable ball on the floor. "You took away your sister's husband. You made sure the bank took the estate. You handed our private family business to the federal government. You are a vindictive, malicious child, and you have ripped the very soul out of this household just to satisfy your own petty, jealous ego. We gave you a premium life. We fed you, clothed you, and gave you a prestigious last name, and you repay us by actively plotting our total annihilation. You could have solved this quietly. You could have asked Harrison to pay the debt. You could have saved us, but you chose to destroy us instead. You are no daughter of mine. You are a traitor to your own bloodline." I stood perfectly still, letting the absolute venom of her words wash over me. For 33 years, a speech like this would have shattered my soul. It would have sent me spiraling into desperate apologies and frantic attempts to earn back her conditional love. But today, standing in the wreckage of their lies, I felt nothing but a profound, untouchable peace. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, and I felt entirely immune to her poison. "I did not destroy this family, Patricia." I stated, my voice echoing with a cold, ringing clarity that cut right through her hysterical sobbing. "Your blinding obsession with status and your insatiable greed destroyed this family. I built a kingdom on a foundation of cheap plastic and demanded that everyone worship it. I took a deliberate step forward, forcing my mother to physically retreat. You chose a thief over your own daughter because he bought you expensive dinners and gave you country club bragging rights. You knew Jamal was a fraud. You knew he bankrupted the generational trust. You knew he stole my social security number to open black market credit lines. You looked at the undeniable evidence that your son-in-law was going to let me drown in federal debt, and you consciously chose to protect him. You were entirely willing to throw me to the wolves, to let my future burn to ash, just so you could keep attending your pathetic cocktail parties without a hint of scandal." Richard squeezed his eyes shut, turning his face away from the brutal, undeniable truth. I did not let him hide. "Look at me, Richard," I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. My father flinched but slowly opened his eyes, meeting my relentless gaze. You wanted to trade my freedom for Madison's designer handbags. You demanded that I extort my partner to bail out a criminal. You are not a patriarch. You are a coward. Neither of you have the slightest concept of what family actually means. I turned my attention back to Patricia, delivering the final fatal blow to our relationship. You just said I am no daughter of yours. Congratulations, Patricia, because that is the very first true statement you have made today. I am officially cutting every single tie to this toxic, decaying bloodline. I will not pay your legal fees. I will not save your credit. I will not visit you when you inevitably move into a cheap rental unit. Do not call me. Do not email me. Do not ever attempt to contact me again. As far as you are concerned, I ceased to exist the exact moment you decided my identity was an acceptable casualty for your fake wealth. I turned my back on them without a single ounce of hesitation. I did not wait for a response, and I did not care if they were crying. I reached out and placed my hand firmly in Harrison's waiting palm, his fingers intertwined with mine, warm and completely anchoring. Together we walked away from the sobbing, broken remnants of my abusers. We stepped through the grand double doors, crossed the stone portico, and walked directly toward the waiting black SUV. I climbed into the back seat, Harrison sliding in right beside me, and the heavy armored door slammed shut on my past forever. 1 year later, the sound of aggressive police sirens and shattering glass had been entirely replaced by the gentle rhythmic crash of crystal blue ocean waves. I stood barefoot on the pristine white sand of a secluded private island in the Caribbean. The tropical breeze was warm and fragrant, carrying the scent of salt water and wild orchids. There were no wealthy country club board members to impress today. There were no fake smiles, no leased luxury cars, and absolutely no toxic relatives waiting to tear me down. Instead, I was surrounded by a small, carefully chosen circle of genuine friends and loyal colleagues. These were the people who had celebrated my quiet successes and respected my strict boundaries. They formed my real family. I wore a simple, elegant silk gown that caught the afternoon light perfectly. It lacked the heavy, ostentatious embellishments my mother would have undoubtedly demanded. It was just me, entirely authentic and completely free. Harrison stood across from me under a beautiful archway of woven palm fronds and vibrant tropical flowers. He looked incredibly handsome in a tailored light linen suit, his dark eyes reflecting the exact same unwavering support he had shown me in that dark mahogany study. When he took my hands in his, the physical contact grounded me completely. We exchanged vows that we had written ourselves, promising true partnership, mutual respect, and absolute transparency. There was no grand theatrical performance designed for a judgmental suburban audience. It was an intimate, powerful declaration of a shared future built on a solid foundation of absolute truth. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the small crowd of our chosen family erupted into genuine, joyous applause. Harrison pulled me close and kissed me, sealing the permanent end of my turbulent past and the beautiful beginning of a truly peaceful life. I looked around at the smiling faces of the people who genuinely loved me, and I knew with absolute certainty that walking out of that foreclosed lake house was the greatest decision I had ever made. The heavy defensive armor I had worn for 33 years to survive my blood relatives had been completely discarded forever. I was finally safe. Back in the United States, the reality my biological family faced was a stark, brutal contrast to my tropical sanctuary. The justice system moves with a cold, mechanical efficiency when presented with ironclad digital evidence. Jamal did not get a quiet settlement or a high-priced legal miracle. He pleaded guilty to multiple counts of federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. He is currently serving a mandatory 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. There is no early parole in the federal system. The loud, arrogant investment banker who mocked my career is now designated by an inmate number stripped of his tailored suits and his heavy gold Rolex. Madison faced an equally devastating reality. With her husband incarcerated and their assets completely seized by federal authorities, her pristine designer lifestyle evaporated overnight. She avoided criminal charges because Jamal had kept her technically insulated from the direct digital execution of the fraud. but she was still left holding the bag for the massive unsecured debt they had accumulated. The elite real estate brokerage fired her immediately to protect their own brand from the massive public scandal. Madison currently works a minimum wage retail job scanning groceries to make the minimum monthly payments on her crushing credit card debt. She no longer wears stacked diamond bracelets or attends charity galas. She lives the exact low-income lifestyle she once viciously mocked me for. Patricia and Richard suffered the exact fate they had desperately tried to avoid. The commercial bank executed the foreclosure on the generational estate without an ounce of mercy. They were physically evicted from the $4 million lake house. The scandal tore through their elite social circles like wildfire. The prestigious country club permanently revoked their membership, citing the severe reputational damage of associating with individuals linked to federal money laundering and identity theft. Every single wealthy friend they had spent decades trying to impress abandoned them entirely. They now live in a cramped two-bedroom rental apartment in an undesirable zip code completely isolated by their own profound shame. They have no estate, no social standing, and no golden child to flaunt. As for me, my specialized legal team worked meticulously alongside the federal investigators to scrub the fraudulent black market loans from my record. My credit score is fully restored, and my cybersecurity firm continues to dominate the industry. I am looking directly at the camera now, speaking to anyone who has ever felt like they were shrinking themselves to fit into a toxic family dynamic. Society constantly tells us that blood is thicker than water. We are conditioned to believe that we owe our parents and siblings our absolute loyalty even when they treat us like disposable garbage. But I am here to tell you that biological connection does not give anyone a free pass to disrespect your boundaries, abuse your generosity, or compromise your future. You are not required to set yourself on fire just to keep your toxic family warm. True family is defined by mutual respect, unwavering support, and genuine love. If the people who share your last name are bringing you nothing but pain, manipulation, and stress, you have every right to pack your bags, lock the door, and walk away. Protecting your peace is the most valuable investment you will ever make. Do not wait for a catastrophic betrayal to realize your own worth. Cut the toxic ties, build your own chosen family, and step into the light. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and cut off a toxic family member to protect your own peace? I want to read your stories. Share your experiences in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about setting firm boundaries and reclaiming your power.